Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about a topic that has sparked intense debate, speculation, and global attention: the idea of an army revolution against Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus. This is not just a simple political discussion, but a deep look into how power, military loyalty, public anger, and international pressure could intersect in one of Europe's most tightly controlled states. Understanding this scenario requires patience, context, and a clear look at how Belarus reached this point. Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus for decades, often described as Europe's last dictator. His leadership style has been marked by centralized power, suppression of opposition, control over media, and heavy reliance on security forces. For many years, this system appeared stable from the outside, but underneath, social frustration and political fatigue continued to grow. Elections, especially those widely seen as rigged, became flashpoints for public anger and mass protests. The most dramatic protests erupted after the 2020 presidential election, when Lukashenko claimed an overwhelming victory that many Belarusians and international observers rejected. Millions took to the streets demanding change, fair elections, and respect for basic rights. The government responded with force, arrests, and intimidation. At that moment, the loyalty of the security forces and the army became the key pillar holding the regime together. In authoritarian systems, the military often decides the fate of leadership. As long as the army obeys orders, the ruler remains in power, but when cracks appear within the ranks, the balance can shift very quickly. In Belarus, the army has traditionally stayed out of politics, presenting itself as a professional and disciplined institution. However, prolonged unrest and internal pressure can challenge even the most rigid structures. The idea of an army revolution against Lukashenko does not necessarily mean tanks rolling through the capital overnight. It could begin in quieter ways, such as refusal to follow orders, silent disobedience, or internal disagreements among senior officers. History shows that many revolutions succeed not because the military openly attacks the leader, but because it chooses not to defend him. Economic conditions also play a major role in shaping military loyalty. Belarus has faced economic sanctions, reduced trade opportunities, and financial pressure from Western countries. When sanctions affect salaries, living standards, and future prospects, even soldiers and officers begin to question the cost of unconditional loyalty. A soldier struggling to provide for his family may see the regime very differently from one benefiting from stability and privilege. Another critical factor is the relationship between Belarus and Russia. Lukashenko has relied heavily on Moscow for political, economic, and security support. Russia sees Belarus as a strategic buffer and ally. However, this dependence also creates tension within Belarusian society and potentially within the army. Some officers may resent the perception of losing sovereignty or becoming overly dependent on a foreign power. If an army revolution were to take shape, it would likely be influenced by a sense of national responsibility. Officers could frame their actions not as a coup, but as a step to prevent chaos, protect civilians, or restore constitutional order. Such narratives are common in military-led political transitions and are often used to justify intervention. Public opinion would be another decisive element. If the majority of the population clearly supports change, it becomes harder for the army to justify repression. Soldiers are drawn from society. They have families, friends, and neighbors among the protesters. When orders conflict with personal conscience, discipline can weaken. This moral dilemma has played a role in many historical revolutions. Communication and information flow are also crucial. In the digital age, soldiers are not isolated from reality. Despite censorship, news spreads through social media, messaging apps, and personal networks. Videos of brutality, testimonies of victims, and international reactions can deeply affect morale within the ranks. Once trust in official narratives erodes, loyalty can follow. An army revolution could also be triggered by a single dramatic event. This might include a violent crackdown causing mass casualties, the arrest or killing of a prominent figure, or a major political betrayal. Such moments can act as catalysts, transforming silent dissatisfaction into decisive action. History often remembers these turning points as moments when everything changed. It is important to understand that not all parts of the security apparatus are the same. In Belarus, internal security forces and riot police have been more directly involved in suppressing protests, while the regular army has played a less visible role. This separation can be strategic, but it also means that different forces may hold different views about the regime and its future. If the army were to turn against Lukashenko, the transition would still be extremely complex. Removing a leader does not automatically create stability or democracy. Questions would immediately arise about who takes power, how elections are organized, and how to avoid violence or fragmentation. The army's role would likely be temporary, at least in theory, but history shows that military involvement often leaves a lasting imprint. International reactions would shape the outcome as well. Western countries would likely welcome the end of authoritarian rule, but would closely watch how the transition unfolds. Russia's response would be even more decisive. Moscow might seek to protect its interests, influence the new leadership, or prevent a shift toward the West. This geopolitical tension adds another layer of risk and uncertainty. From Lukashenko's perspective, preventing an army revolution is a top priority. This is why authoritarian leaders invest heavily in loyalty, surveillance, and division within the security forces. Promotions, privileges, and personal ties are used to ensure obedience. At the same time, fear is used as a tool, with harsh punishments for dissent or disobedience. However, fear has limits. When a regime appears weak or isolated, fear can turn into desperation. Officers may start thinking about their future after the regime, calculating whether loyalty will protect them or expose them to blame. In such moments, self-preservation can outweigh ideological commitment. The concept of legitimacy is central here. Lukashenko's long rule was once justified by stability and economic security. As these benefits decline, legitimacy erodes. The army, like any institution, prefers to align itself with what it sees as the legitimate authority. When legitimacy shifts toward the people or an alternative leadership, military calculations change. It is also worth considering the generational factor. Younger soldiers and officers may have different views from older commanders shaped by Soviet-era thinking. Exposure to the outside world, different values, and new expectations can quietly reshape attitudes within the military. Over time, this generational shift can weaken the ideological foundations of authoritarian rule. An army revolution does not always look dramatic on the surface. Sometimes it is the absence of action that matters most. The refusal to intervene, the choice to stay in barracks, or the decision to negotiate instead of repress can be revolutionary in itself. Power can collapse not with an explosion, but with silence. Belarus's future, whether shaped by an army revolution or another path, depends on the interaction between state institutions and society. The courage of protesters, the calculations of elites, and the conscience of soldiers all play a role. No single actor controls the outcome completely, and that uncertainty defines moments of historical change. Looking at global history, we see examples where armies chose the people and facilitated peaceful transitions. We also see cases where military involvement led to prolonged instability or new forms of authoritarianism. Belarus stands at a crossroads where multiple futures remain possible. The discussion of an army revolution against Lukashenko is not about glorifying conflict, but about understanding power dynamics. It raises questions about responsibility, loyalty, and the role of force in politics. These questions are uncomfortable but necessary, especially in societies struggling for change. For ordinary Belarusians, the hope is simple: dignity, freedom, and a voice in their own future. Whether the army becomes an agent of change or a guardian of the status quo will significantly influence that hope. The weight of this decision rests heavily on the shoulders of those in uniform. In the end, revolutions are not only fought in streets or barracks, they are fought in minds. When enough people, including soldiers, believe that the old system cannot continue, change becomes inevitable. The form that change takes, however, remains uncertain until the very last moment. As we watch events unfold and analyze possibilities, it is important to stay grounded in facts and empathy. Behind every political scenario are real lives affected by fear, hope, and sacrifice. The story of Belarus is still being written, and the role of the army may yet become one of its most decisive chapters. That brings us to the core question, not whether an army revolution against Lukashenko is possible, but under what conditions it becomes unavoidable. History suggests that when legitimacy collapses, economic pressure intensifies, and moral lines are crossed, even the strongest regimes can fall. Whether Belarus reaches that point depends on choices being made right now, often behind closed doors, far from public view. As observers, analysts, and global citizens, our role is to understand, not oversimplify. The situation in Belarus is complex, fragile, and deeply human. Whatever happens next, it will shape the country for generations, and the echoes will be felt far beyond its borders.